Is it rating?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks everybody for participating. I think what was a quite energetic and enthusiastic workshop. When we did a run through of this in the UK, just to make sure that the format worked, and it was, we thought, quite refreshing to find that Inspire could actually be a lot worse than it is. But again, we identified some strengths and weaknesses, so it'd be very interesting to see what the two groups came up with. The reason I'm standing at the front is because one of the requirements of the conference is that every session is videoed. The format of this workshop didn't really lend itself to that, so I'm going to ask the two people who've agreed to do feedback from the groups, Martin Lenk and Ray Boguslavsky, to come up and just give a little walkthrough of the things that came out of the discussion, talk about the checklist that you got, and then talk about how you'd spend the 20,000 euros. Group one first, is that Ray? Yeah.
Hello.
So if you can choose the microphone, please.
Yeah. How long do you want?
Up to 15 minutes.
Oh, okay, right. Okay, so...
Sorry, Ray, the camera's just...
Oh, there's a camera as well, right. So it was a good question. What's wrong with Inspire? If it had been asked what's right with Inspire, we'd have all been to the coffee break earlier. But as there was no coffee, it didn't matter anyway. So the right question, and yeah, some very interesting ideas came through. We did the usual, come up with the ideas and cluster them, of course. And in terms of clusters, I think we started looking at some of the coordination problems and how the difficulties in organising something like this are. So things like it takes so long that everyone forgets what they were doing in the first place and what they've learnt. We lose the original objectives, and we change the rules in the middle of this. So this is such a large initiative, such an immense initiative, that how can you keep it attuned to what's happening, and how can you coordinate something like this so effectively. The ground changes beneath you during the time. All the environmental problems are solved without it. Lots more countries decide they want to leave the EU, and they create chaos. We don't have leadership to run this thing. It doesn't matter anyway because it's the wrong thing in the first place. So there was a whole cluster around that, and we felt quite satisfied with ourselves after that. But then we came up with more, so that was good. And eventually, after thinking about standards and the support model and portals and things, we eventually came to think about users, and that was telling in itself. So once we started thinking about users, we got a little bit excited. So that was nice. And so on the user side, of course, there might be no demand from the users for the data. There might be no data for them anyway, so it doesn't really matter. And the whole also we thought there's too much focus on reporting in Inspire. I mean, those are the really important use cases, aren't they? Those complicated reporting requirements. So, yeah, and Inspire is focused too much on that. Why not solve some problems that affect people in their daily lives rather than reporting to the Commission? There's more users in the Commission. The whole thing's too complicated anyway, so why bother? No one can understand it. So why bother? Associated with that, we looked at the whole support model for users, and decided that the support model might be completely wrong anyway. Let's have more documents, let's have more bureaucracy, let's have the wrong thematic working groups, let's mix everything up and pretend we're making it exciting. And there's more technology than there should be, and we're not focusing on people enough. So let's do the right thing and introduce even more technology and forget about the people completely. There was a really interesting problem in that there were no software tools at all to do the job, and that would be no good. And to compound that, all the software tools that there were, and there were none, were full of bugs. So we didn't understand that one, but it was an incomprehensible session, so that was probably appropriate. No metadata harvesting, no experts. So there's a great thrust towards unlearning what had been set out in the first place. A small group, well actually quite a large group, seemed to think a lot about standards, and they felt that we could make it worse by having no standards, or we could make it worse by having more standards, or by having new standards, or having standards on top of standards, and competition with other standards initiatives. So we were quite excited about that because, of course, we weren't user-focused, so the standards were really important to us all. And portals are a great thing, aren't they? So we thought we could make things worse by having more portals. No one thought we could make things worse by having no portals or fewer portals. So yeah, portals are quite quite important. We could have a more chaotic website than we have currently. So that's useful. And less federation. I mean, who wants a community? Who wants a federated approach? And interoperability, we decided, was a waste of time anyway. But we all knew that. But we've been going along with this all along. I know. Yeah. So the portals, the support model, the technology. Oh, we decided, after all, this investment in linked data, that we suddenly found out that it didn't work. But we were pleased we had the investment because we felt better educated and informed. So that was a tour around our thoughts on how we could make it worse. And then we were given the wonderful task of spending 20,000 euros on all the things to solve that. So we felt that was a sensible challenge, and we really appreciated the workshop being organised and turning up at 9 o'clock to be given 20,000 euros to solve all these problems. So you got a clue on the groups there, and we decided we'd spend the money. We didn't say whether it would be equally, but we decided we'd spend the money first of all on satisfying user demand and tackling their priorities and giving what they need so that they can develop their applications and their services. We didn't say who those users would be, whether they might be commissioned policymakers. On the e-reporting side, I'd like to think they were businesses and citizens who use services, but that's another story. So user centricity was our number one. The funding aspect, actually, I haven't brought out, and there was a number of points on that about not having money or not having free data to be able to use, and that obviously is a problem when your users want to use that data. So opening data was very important as well, and that's allied to user centricity. We felt that the tools and the technology, although something of a too heavy focus, if you don't have the tools and the technology, you can't actually build those applications. So that was an important area as well. Number three, and the learning aspect of this is particularly important, and I would say awareness raising as well, but the whole aspect of capacity building to be able to support this, we felt was was key. We felt we had to give a place to standardization. So, yeah, that came in there, but I didn't vote for that one. And last of all, interestingly, and I started off with it first, so the thing we first thought of, coordination, came up last on our list. So there you go. However much effort you put into coordination, it still doesn't get sorted out. So there we are.
Thanks very much. Anybody got any questions for Ray and for that group that came out of that? Any sort of interesting points from the floor? There doesn't have to be. We can go into Martin if you're ready, Martin.
Thank you, John. Not prepared. And so I have to present you our results. When I compare that, it looks like we didn't have so much output, or... Thank you, Mark. Or maybe less discussion, I don't know, but at least we have more structure. You see? We have clear lines. Thanks to you, Mark, because you were the director of this chart. We did exactly the same. We just collected ideas, and then we clustered them. We changed them a couple of times, and then we came up to these lines. What you see here is, I would say, Mark, you have to correct me because I think I didn't follow as good as you. This was the this is the coordination line. So anything to do with European coordination is written down here. For instance, that is maybe a compliment to the Commission, being forgotten by the Commission. That would be worse. Or no MIG. I think we all appreciate that we have the MIG. Then the next one is, I would say, somehow like the technical, the side of standardization. Is that right, Mark? So, for instance, you say less clear definitions, no standards. I think this is nothing new. So I do not need to go too much into details. Then the third one is very short, but very clear, I think. It has something to do with no support from open data. I think licenses is a big issue. It could be worse if we wouldn't have the development of open data. I think strong message. Then the last here, the second last, because that you can see as one cluster I introduce later. The second last here is the national side. What we had here is more the European side, things we basically have to face together with the Commission, together in the, I call it the family of the member states. And here it is, things which could go worse on the national side. For instance, no budget for implementation. Just as an example, in Germany, we have a central coordination office, we have technical components which we run, and that is budget. You need budget on the national side. That could be worse. Oh, no legislation on the national side. And the last one was divided. I hope I can explain. That was a bit of a difficult discussion at the end, I think. It means basically use cases. Use cases and end-user applications. I think we just heard that from the other group as well, is a big issue. And we were, first of all, just having one row, and then we saw, when it comes to where should the money go into, where should be the investment, we split it in like partnership with private developers, private industry. That's where we need money flowing, even from the private industry as well. And then, on the other hand, the institutional side. The idea was, imagine there would be a huge budget on the European level for environmental reporting, and they would have a complete change management process, for instance, in the environmental agency, and they would change the whole process of environmental reporting. That could have a big, huge influence on developing basically software, but also on the data provider side from national level. There would be a clear requirement. We think at the moment here there is a little bit of, let's say, chaos, and some big, huge investment would be helpful. This is the content, the things we were discussing, and now we come to the money. I don't know how you did it in your other group, but everybody could say, I would invest my money here or there or whatever. So you see, this is the big issue here. We think this is where we need the money now. I think coordination, you know, if it would be worse, it would need some money as well. I must say there is some coordination, which we can already use. Then the technical standard side as well. Basically, only little budget here on the legal side, and then a huge amount of money on the end-user application issue and on the use cases. Anything forgotten, Mark, or the others? I don't know.
The group? People on the second group? Anything about orphans?
Oh, they lost. These things we couldn't sort in. We could probably, if we would have more time, you know, even less use cases would have, you know, got up there. But I don't know. Anything there you want to add, which I haven't mentioned?
Thank you.
Once again, thanks everybody. Any immediate thoughts about what we did this morning? Was it interesting? Michael?
No, I just wanted to ask a question about the open data, because we said that the open data is probably the most expensive thing that we need to support if we want to have that. But you didn't attach any money to it in the other group. That was interesting. So everybody wants open data, but nobody wants to pay for it?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, I think what I heard was the number one thing was users. That we need to know more about downstream users and what's happening with the data. I was surprised that standards didn't come a bit higher. Also, maybe slightly surprised again, just because we'd run this exercise in the UK. Guidance seemed to be a big issue for UK data publishers. Doesn't really seem to have featured here, but that might be because it's at a national level. Sorry, Mario.
And for interoperability and so on. And I think the issue is that because we are already working on it.
Okay.
So the reason why I think the first group we put a lot of money on the user perspective, it's because that's something that we need, that it's in a lower level, something that we need to invest a lot. On interoperability, you already have the legislation, we have the specifications, we are on our way, but we are not on our way for the user side. So I think this explains why we put more money on the user side than on interoperability. Yes.
Okay, very interesting. Michael, sorry. Well, I just want to go in. Sorry,
the use cases or the users are actually spurring the demand for interoperability. I find it so hard to go the other way around it, build a lot of interoperability and then find out it's not of any use. So it's the way how you start with the user or with the technique.
What I found interesting about the last group and the user, the two columns there, is that you actually split it into the public sector user and then the private sector users. Because I think that is something we've been saying for several years now. We need to do more about the users, but the user groups remain a bit fuzzy, and it's not really clear who the users are. And I think this distinction between the two sides might be quite useful, because maybe we need to do different things for the two sides. So it might actually be two separate columns, even though that they're related. So I think that's an interesting direction to think further into.
Can I suggest three separate columns? The third one being members of the public.
But in fact, private sector doesn't work for him. He's working for customers, and customers more or less are citizens.
So I think the private sector is also like a kind of a intermediate users. So we want to involve them so to create business over the Inspire data sets. On the other side, on the public domain, what we are expecting is how can we use the Inspire data for implementing legislation. So it's end users on this side and intermediate users on the other side.
Any other thoughts? Anybody want to share anything else?
I liked here that it was mentioned the European Environmental Agency, and I really don't understand why European Environmental Agency is not really mentioned in the directive, and it does not have a role if we are speaking about coordination as well. I'm not understanding why now a lot of, so actually Inspire goes more in the field of cadastre, geodesy and things like this rather than environment, even if it's written clearly in the directive that this is for environment protection. And we see some switch from environment to cadastre, at least in our country.
Actually, I have the contrary now. In Portugal, it's the opposite. In Portugal, everyone now is saying that Inspire is too much environmental oriented and that we are forgetting the reference data sets. It's exactly the opposite.
It's interesting to see this or hear these different sides, because I agree to you. In Germany, the SDI theme is in the hands of the land surveying authorities and not on the environmental side. And maybe that's why we had the idea we need more money on the environmental side, because money always helps. Yeah, I think this is a gap, which we need to close.
The situation in France is for 4 or 5 years now, we drop the National Mapping Agency from the heart of the Inspire organization, because when Mario talked about immediate users on young users, in fact, when we are working for public authorities, for environment or anything else, we are working for citizens using services from public authorities. And in fact, the end users for public authorities is always citizens or inhabitants. So when I use Inspire web services to help urban planning, for example, by the end of the process, it is citizens, it is inhabitants, it is not only, civil servants. So I think it is interesting to work on it. We have always end users far away, but it is impossible to manage it because it's too far away. And so we could have a specific focus on the first row of users because we can touch them.
Yeah, because the gentleman next to John said something about the European Environment Agency, I have to say, first of all, we are together with the Commission and the Joint Research Center in the Inspire coordination team, but we maybe have a similar situation here than in many of the countries, that the environmental authorities, they were becoming later aware of Inspire. And it's part of, in the Inspire legislation, with this notion of, I would call it maybe a layered infrastructure. First, we need to have the very basics, which we understand is some reference data, is something from the cadastre, from the mapping agencies. And then, on top of that, we build the environmental piece. And these days, we have the valid discussion, how big is then this additional environmental piece? And there we are engaging with our limits which we have as an environmental institutions, where we have all the other scientists who have their own thematic topics and their own data discussions and where we have to show the added value of this cross-cutting discussion. More I don't want to say.
Thank you for the microphone. I just wanted to add to the discussion about the basic data and environmental data, just a point of view from the Czech Republic, because our mapping agency sees a shift to environmental data and they don't like it. It's actually as we have now the new working plan for discussion in the MIGP, we are supposed to rewrite it or comment it in a way that the importance of basis data is not lost. So it's completely different, or the other way in the Czech Republic.
I have some problems to understand why you say that the reference data, the problem of the reference data set is solved. Because picking up one example of the European Environment Agency in the Copernicus program, they needed an European hydrography layer. And they went to the InspireGeo portal, and they were not able to build this data set. So they spent a lot of money to a private company to create an European hydrography set. So we don't have the reference problem solved, I'm sorry. And the same problem, the same issue with the digital elevation model. They could not create an European digital elevation model picking up the data that's in InspireGeo portal. So I don't think the reference data is solved, I'm sorry. And just one more thing. And I think it's easier at the national level and even at European level to get money for the environmental side than for the reference data. Because for the environmental side, everyone can see how important it is to have data on the atmospheric issues or on the noise issues, on water quality. But how can you convince people that it's important to invest to have a digital elevation model? I think it's more difficult. Yeah.
And then again, different in Denmark. Because we can only fund our basic data. This is where the Ministry of Finance is funding us. So everything has to connect to e-government, even the environment, in order to be funded.
Well, the reference data, this is the German side, and I guess it's in other countries as well, is a license problem.
How interesting. This actually is really interesting because the second part of the workshop, which starts at 11, is going to touch on these issues. So it's, I believe it's 10:30 now. There's coffee available, and they've opened this door, so you don't have to walk all the way around. But could I ask, please, that everybody comes back as close to 11 as possible, if not exactly at 11, because there's quite a lot to get through in the second session. And I hope you all come back as well. Thanks a lot.